Hey everyone, and welcome to another Good Vibes Gaming discussion. I'm John Cartwright, and I am joined by the bodacious Derek Binner.
Ooh,
hey Derek.
Bodacious. Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. We've just had a non-E3 season, and it doesn't feel like it, does it? Like every other year would be like, here is the Xbox discussion, here's the PlayStation discussion, but we haven't really done any of that this year. And I'm not really sure what we can latch onto in that. I mean, I guess Sonic Forces was kind of the big discussion point that we could have done. But like, there's no other big game that kind of stands out, and so like, I'm trying to think like, what feels different about this year? What was the big standout game? And I think probably the biggest take from PlayStation's format was probably The Last of Us Part 1. It's a game that had a lot of us feeling quite divisive. It's a game that leaked like a year ago at this point, and even the concept of it was divisive. And so now that we've seen it, what were your initial thoughts watching that trailer?
The presentation itself, it was so hard to tell a difference. And I've seen it pop up a lot on Twitter, people comparing shots. And I have a hard time telling which is honestly a credit to the remaster and the original. Like, my God, that is gorgeous. And it still looks good that it is only like a minor thing. The biggest difference I could discover in any of the comparisons was Tess. They had a comparison of her, and Tess is a major difference. Everybody else is sort of the same, but it seems like NPCs might get a little bit more care and attention compared to Joel and Ellie, who already got a ton of care and attention. So it makes sense in that aspect. But for the most part, I think what they were trying to do for this initial reveal is it's the game you remember, just prettier. But we couldn't tell how pretty it was, and they say there's going to be like some additions from part 2, but I've not played part 2 yet, so I don't know what those additions are. I'm not quite familiar with that. It's one of those things where it's cool to those who have not had a chance to play it, but considering it's coming out on the PS5, which a lot of people don't have, and most people have it on the PS4, I don't know that that's necessarily an advantage. Like it's cool to have, but I don't know if it's a big get,
And I think one major problem is on the PS5 you can play The Last of Us Remastered right now. And obviously that is an older game at this point. That came out 1 year after the original on PS4. And they basically, I guess, I'd say future-proofed it. They made it 60 FPS, the resolution's higher, things look a bit prettier. It's just kind of like the technically more sound version. But it's still very good. And as you were saying just now, the original Last of Us still looks incredible. If you play through the PS4 version now, I think that it wouldn't be too hard to disassociate that from what we have right now. This is going to be like a very blanket statement, but I don't think that games have really moved on that much since The Last of Us. Like, when I think about what has progressed in the industry, I think we have chased different formats, like a lot of battle royales, a lot of free-to-play games. But when you look at the big AAA games, or the third-person games, they are still following that template set by The Last of Us back in 2013. And to come back 9 years later and return to the same point while progressing so little, it makes me question why we're doing this. And obviously it does look better. I've seen comparison shots. There's definitely the facial expressions in particular look much, much better. But I don't know if that's enough, especially if it's still mostly going to play the same.
Yeah, it's basically Naughty Dog saying that, the story is what matters here, not the graphics. Another chance to experience the story you love and maybe get it, looking a little bit prettier so you can have that and just sell it to another audience. That's sort of the big thing here. And certain games do look like they have major steps. Like, one of my favorite series is Ratchet and Clank. Now, obviously, we had the remaster and sort of the movie tie-in on PS4, and obviously that was a huge step up from PS2 to PS4. But even, I would argue, seeing that Ratchet and Clank PS4 compared to Rift Apart is a major difference. There is, like, you can tell that one is on PS4 and one is on PS5, and I don't know what it's... I mean, obviously, Naughty Dog spent years on Last of Us, getting it all set, so the quality is there, while Ratchet and Clank PS4, I think, had 8 months. So there's a time issue there. That's also why it just looks so much better, on PS5 comparatively. But you're right. It's so hard to see those major differences now, unless it just had a glaring issue at one point. Because, and I know you've mentioned this on Twitter, and we got our boy Leon here joining us. Resident Evil is kind of a poster child for this, because it is hard to believe that the original Resident Evil remake was one generation away from the original Resident Evil.
6 years. 6 years away.
6 years. 6 years away. Meanwhile, Last of Us PS5 to Last of Us PS3 is 9 years. What a difference! Like, we've caught up.
No one was complaining though. Like with Resident Evil to Resident Evil Remake, it was one generation. It was 6 years later. The original game was still like a cornerstone of survival horror. It wasn't old, but I guess with that generational gap, suddenly things did feel old. Like, people wanted Final Fantasy VII Remake back on the PS2, even before the tech demo, which I think the tech demo was like 2005, I think?
Yeah, I think the tech demo was on for PS3, so...
Yeah, I think that was shown off in like 2005, 2006. But even then, we wanted a Final Fantasy VII Remake almost a generation after. Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes got a remake the generation after. It was such a huge jump from PS1 to PS2 that I think you could suddenly justify remaking those games. Not only from a visual perspective, which was huge, like going from the flapping model of Solid Snake on PS1 to fully animated mouths and everyone looking like humans now. But also the gameplay. Like, the frame rates were more solid, the resolution was higher, but also what you could achieve. Worlds were more vast. We had a controller that really hasn't changed since, like, from then to now. Like, dual analog sticks were a standard of PlayStation 2, and they're still a standard now. I think just going from PS1 to PS2 is something that we'll never see again. And that jump is much larger than PS3 to PS4 to PS5, which is, multiple generations. I'm not sure we'll ever see that again. Even saying that, though, I think there's a difference between early PS3 and late PS3.
Yes.
The Last of Us was pushing the boundaries of that system, had a ton of budget, but Demon's Souls, on the other hand, is another game that was on PS3, got remade on PS5, and I think if you watched a trailer for Demon's Souls, you wouldn't be like, oh yeah, that's how I remember it, because it looks so different. The original one was this sort of like barren, grey land, and that was almost its visual identity for some. But the remake has all of this like overgrown art style. There's like moss on the walls, there's grass that comes up to here, and I think you can immediately tell that they look different. Whereas The Last of Us, I think you look at it and you're like, yeah, that's how I remember it looking.
Yeah, that memory is in there. It's that. I mean, you want to talk about early PS3 to late PS3, just look at the Uncharted series. The first Uncharted looks very basic nowadays. It looked gorgeous at the time. It was like, oh my god, his shirt's wet after and stays wet after it gets out of the water. That was a big selling point when the original Uncharted was being advertised. But to look at how much they jumped with Uncharted 2 and 3 is incredible. And Last of Us was even after that. So no wonder at this point Naughty Dog was just an old hand at the PS3. They knew what they were doing, and it's just that jump. And I think that's the last kind of jump we'll ever get, is early PS3 to late PS3, because I'm trying to think. It's been a while, but I don't know if I could tell you a difference between early PS4 and late PS4 as much.
I'm trying to think too. I'm really not sure. I look at games like Bloodborne, which that was 2015, and I think the PS4 really took a while to take off. We had like Killzone Shadowfall and Knack and Infamous. I think Infamous still looks good.
Yeah.
That was 2014, I want to say. But yeah, like judging just like the Witcher 3 era, the Bloodborne era, I think that still looks really good today. And when you compare it to what we're getting now, maybe it's not that different. But if a game releases now and it's cross-gen, if it's PS4 and PS5, I think that is a very different feeling to what it's ever been in the past. Like when we got cross-gen PS3 and PS4 games, I think we were like, oh yeah, this is clearly a PlayStation 3 game. I want to move on to PS4. And I'm still kind of in the mindset where I want to see more PS5 stuff. But I'm not like angry about it. Like Elden Ring is a cross-gen game. I'm like, yeah, this looks good. This still looks really, really good. And it runs great on PS5. We've kind of got this diminishing returns sort of thing going on with hardware now. where it's tricky to say how much further we can go without it just kind of being like a bit more detail. Like there was an old tweet from the fake PlayStation CEO parody account where it's like, well, we've added like 30% more to Joel's facial hair. And that's kind of like what has happened here. Obviously, they've done a lot to the remake, but I think that's just kind of the place we're in with hardware.
Yeah, it does feel like that. Like the big reason to me to get PS5 over PS4, one, you might as well get it if you have the system because you might as well use it. But also, two, the load times. That's the big technical improvement this time around, is that those load times are vastly improved and can really make a difference in how you play those old games. That's the reason to get PS5 nowadays. It's just so quick to load. Graphically, yeah, it'll look good. There's some really good looking games out there, but even it's obviously we only saw a few seconds of it. But I had a hard time really telling the difference between, and maybe it's a memory thing again, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth to the original PS4 Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Mm-hmm.
That's how even they are now. And I know there's the graph, they showed the side by side, and it's obvious when you see it side by side, but the way my memory works, it's like, oh yeah, that's how it looks.
Yeah. With I guess with Rebirth, scale's probably going to be the bigger thing. Like it looked like a much larger environment. We're seeing like the Nibelheim sequence, perhaps that's what that was.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in terms of just the graphical foundation, they are going to look very, very similar, and that's just kind of the point we're at. But I want to look at like other series for a moment, like Pokemon. That has a reputation of getting remakes. We expect remakes between generations. And I think with the most recent one, with Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl, there was kind of like a breaking point almost, where a lot of people who were okay with remakes in the past are kind of like, oh, this is just more of the same. I don't think I want this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to see how quickly they start remaking games. Like Pokemon launched in Japan in 1996, but we got it in the West in 98. So judging from that 98 point, we got Fire Red and Leaf Green in 2004. So 6 years later, like the same as Resident Evil, a 6-year gap between the original and the remake. But I don't remember picking up Fire Red and being like, this is too soon. I just remember playing it and being like, oh, I can run now. I can like go to these new islands. The graphics look way better. I can trade with other GBA games. It felt substantial. Even though it was still a 2D game, it felt like a substantial upgrade.
And there was a reason for it as well, because there was no way for the original Game Boy to trade with Game Boy Advance. They needed to remake those in order to get the old Pokemon into the Game Boy Advance generation. So it served that dual purpose. So not only are you getting the game you remember remade, but you're also getting, the Pokemon you don't have access to. So I think that's the other big thing that with these remakes is each one kind of served a purpose, less and less as time goes on. But it still felt like a significant upgrade with new content that I enjoyed. A lot, obviously people love the Heart Gold, Soul Silver remakes. The Gen 3 remakes are a bit more controversial, but I personally like them because I think it has one of the best epilogues in the series, with its whole thing with Rayquaza. But I'm one of those people that was like, did we really need a Gen 4 remake in this case? Because nothing changed. There was no purpose to it. And it's just like, hey, here's your nostalgia. And maybe that's, and I argued this in that old video as well, maybe that's why Game Freak was the one who focused on Pokemon Legends and not an actual remake. We got a different sort of idea with Gen 4 in revisiting it, and just a new idea around it. And honestly, I think I'd rather see that for a Pokemon Gen 5 throwback, be in the Legends series, rather than just a straight remake, if they're just going to keep it so similar. Especially when one of the selling point, the best points about Gen 5 are its graphics. It is the pinnacle of the sprite work in Pokemon.
Yeah, you're doing a downgrade if you redo that in 3D. Like you're taking these beautiful seasons, you're taking fully animated sprites of Pokemon. If you do that again in like the Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl style, no way will it look better. It'd be almost embarrassing, I think, if you do it in that style. And Legends does seem like the path forward. They're not remakes. They're new games taking like foundation and story elements of the originals, but totally doing their own thing with them. So personally, I think I'm done with Pokemon remakes, and I'm reaching a point where I don't know when I want any more remakes in the modern era. Like, let's take 2013 as like the breaking point with The Last of Us. I think most games that launched in that period still play exactly like the games we're getting now. Like BioShock Infinite launched that year as well. Do I think that should be remade? No, I think that's nonsense. If they remade that game from the ground up, I'd say, why are you doing that? Why are you bringing all these resources into that?
We have a remaster. It looks just fine.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just trying to think, like, where is the breaking point for you? Like, if I say, like, I'm going to remake, I don't know, let's say I'm going to remake Sonic Lost World from the ground up, would you say, Sega, why?
In some aspects, no, but yes, but also, Lost World's an interesting example because there are things you can improve. It's why people are arguing, like, obviously, Resident Evil 4 is a better game than Code Veronica, but people want Code Veronica more because that could be improved. And they had a choice here because with the Resident Evil remakes, we're finally out of the PS1 era. And we can see actual improvements done to the games. But they instead chose to keep with 4 because that is the more impressive one. And I think that's also interesting because with the style they seem to have gone for, we don't know enough yet, but they've taken away the camp and increased the horror, at least from what we've seen. And I think that's kind of a key point there. You need to make it feel different now than what the original was in those cases. 7, you can argue you kind of want as the original, or if they went in their own sort of different way. But yeah, as far as that's concerned, if they're going to remake it, it's taking a game that had issues and making it better, or taking a game and sort of changing its tone. And I think that's how you get excited about a remake at this point.
Resident Evil 4 is a very interesting one, because you're right, that was also announced this year, like The Last of Us. And they showed a little bit, like they showed the story trailer, and then during the Capcom presentation, there was like 5 seconds of some over-the-shoulder walking.
Yeah.
And yeah, it looks darker. It looks like they're taking a more horror approach. But over on like social media, people are latching on to the characters. Like, here's what Ashley looks like. Here's what Leon looks like. I think that's because we haven't really seen much of the gameplay itself. Mm-hmm. I predict that game will review very well. I think people will like it. But I don't know if it's going to have the same impact. I don't know if it's going to have the same like lasting impact as the original. I'm not sure if it can. I hope that it's great, but I don't know if it can have that cultural phenomenal impact like the first Resident Evil 4 had.
I think it'll be fun, but we're not going to see it ported as many times as the original Resident Evil 4.
I think hardware is also another thing. Like 3DS games, if you remade Kid Icarus Uprising, I'd be standing and cheering. I think that game getting a remake, it would be a huge thing. And maybe that's because it still feels like that PS2 kind of era.
I think so. It's that graphical styling because, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, getting those onto consoles and improving them even that much further. Yes, absolutely. Let's do it. And there's a lot of great games on there. I think people would be really excited for Shin Megami Tensei 4 was on the 3DS and getting that off. And there's a lot of great RPGs there that could be just touched up and have a remaster and look great. But I think you're right. It's that certain graphical point where it's like looks nice, but isn't quite done enough. And I think I don't know why, but Super Mario 64 DS is sort of wrapped in my head because
that was also a very recent one to when it released. Was that like it was 96 for the original and 2004 for the remake?
I would argue, like, it may not be as detailed as the original 64, but the models are better. Yeah. Or at least more how they're supposed to look.
Yeah, more defined.
Yeah.
It's something very specific to this industry. Like, when movies get remakes, they tend to be like these cult classics. Like, years and years later, decades later, often. And I know Spider-Man got, like, rebooted because of just complicated rights and everything like that. But movies don't just get remade like 10 years later. It's rare for that to happen.
Yeah. It's and the one time, it's never 1-to-1. There's usually changes in it. I've never seen the Psycho remake, but I know that one gets panned completely because it's just the same movie with different actors. So you can't really do that in Hollywood. That said, I'm honestly really surprised 3D animation hasn't picked up on this aspect of gaming that the gaming has, because it's a little surprising they decided, like Pixar didn't decide, let's remake Toy Story, keep the same voice actors, jokes, everything else exactly the same, but make it so it's looks modern, because those Toy Story models do not look that great anymore. I mean, you could do the original with Shrek, but maybe it'll cost too much money to do that for just a simple remake, but I don't know.
I mean, I would watch that. I'd watch a Toy Story remake, absolutely. I would not watch a Toy Story 3 remake, though, because I think that already looks so good.
Yeah, it gets to that point. I think it's like maybe Finding Nemo on, or maybe, Finding Nemo on is when it's like, don't touch him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. It's like, let's take another recent big movie, the first Avengers. If Kevin Feige came out and said, we are taking the original actors, we're bringing them back, we're going to do a shot-for-shot remake, they're going to say the lines in the exact same way, Hulk's going to be greener, I don't know what people would, how would they latch onto that? Why are you doing that? That's a waste of resources. I think waste of resources is the big thing I'm latching onto with The Last of Us. This is Naughty Dog. Naughty Dog is doing this. It's not some third party who have come in to touch up the textures. They're doing it from the ground up. They've redone every asset. They've made it like one-to-one with the original, but they've done it entirely from the ground up. And that effort and manpower, I feel like would have been better spent elsewhere. There's lots of older, less current IP, like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, for instance. They came back with remakes, and they were going from PS1 to PS4 in that case. But people were just excited to see those brands back. I think you could have remade them from any generation, and people would just be happy that they exist again. But when you're remaking The Last of Us, it's like, this is so recent. If they did like Jak and Daxter, which I don't think needs a remake, I think Jak and Daxter is absolutely fine as it is, but if they did that, I think people would still be happy. They'd be like, oh yeah, Jack's back. Yeah,
because I was just thinking that, because one of the things that I'm sure you saw it, but like Mario 64, it has a native PC port now of Jak and Daxter, and they're working on Jak 2 and 3. And I'm sure they're going to get some graphical improvements that we would have maybe seen in a remake. And I think Jak and Daxter are at that point where they could have expanded upon that. They could have improved upon those concepts and really made it feel like a worthwhile remake in all three of those games' cases.
I want to bring this back to film just for a little bit. So Disney did those live-action remakes. We had like Beauty and the Beast, we've had Cinderella, we had The Lion King. A few of them stand out, I think. I think Aladdin stands out because it's different. It's a different take on the original.
Right.
But The Lion King, are we still going to be talking about that interpretation 10 years from now, do you think?
I'll be honest, I still forget about it. Like, I've not seen it, but I don't think about it at all. That is, it's not Lion King to me. Nobody thinks about, like, everybody talks about the live action remakes. Nobody remembers Cinderella, and that was one of the first.
No.
Like, and I think Aladdin's falling out of the conversation. I think most of them are falling out of the conversation. They don't matter. And we'll see, like, we got Pinocchio coming up, and that one's done by, that one might be pretty good. They're matching it there, and there's been a lot of Pinocchio reinterpretations, but on the whole, it feels not worth it.
The gaming industry is still very young. Like, a lot of the biggest if you just stick to Nintendo, and they're far from the youngest in the business. But if we just stick to them, we're talking 80s forward. We're talking 40 years of Nintendo history, and that's not a lot. That isn't much compared to any other medium. And so when we're remaking something, it's taking something that's usually pretty fresh and putting it in a new format. And there's definitely more remakes that I would be happy for, but it's so tough to say anything recent would get my motor going. Like, if they took Paper Mario 64 and put it in the new style, I would be excited for that. But when they took Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story from DS to 3DS, a platform that could already play the original, I just kind of thought, like, why are you doing this? And that ended up killing the company in the end.
Bowser's Inside Story is widely considered to be the best, the favorite of the entire franchise, and it sold the worst, this remake. It killed the company, killed Alpha Dream. People don't care when they have a way to play it. It's it's a shame. Like the big reason to have these type of remakes, I believe, is accessibility. If you didn't have access to them originally and they're much harder to find, that's when they become these sort of remakes feel worth it. But, you know, that's why we also get remasters.
That's another thing for this industry. We've got a lot of terms. We've got ports, we've got remasters, we've got remakes.
Yeah.
I think ports is kind of... we don't really talk about ports. Everything's a remaster nowadays. It's just kind of like, it's high resolution, it's a remaster. But yeah, you're right. A lot of companies from the early... in like the 90s, I guess, a lot of them have lost their source codes. So just doing like a native port isn't always viable. I know with Trials of Mana, Square had to reach out to Nintendo for the source code to get the... for Collection of Mana. So that was kind of interesting to see that happen. And there's also a remake with Trials of Mana. And it's cool having two very different versions. You got the 2D version and the 3D version. You can choose whichever one you want. I think that was a really great way of doing that. But yeah, it's hard to say where exactly I can land on where the cutoff is. I think it's usually modern stuff. Like retro is a term that is always, for me, going to end with the rough 3D era. So like PlayStation, N64, Saturn. That for me is retro. I struggle to call something like PS2 and Xbox retro because they still feel like, if I boot up Metal Gear Solid 3, I still feel like that's a modern game.
Yeah. I can definitely see that. I think there are certain PS2 games that feel more like PS1 than modern. So that PS2 is, I think, where it gets a little bit more iffy. Like it is more of a case by case basis, whether it feels retro or not. It's so interesting that aspect, and you're right about the source code stuff. It's like I kind of hope for more of these type of remakes where they did lose the source code and do that sort of thing, because obviously you have Panzer Dragoon Saga. Nobody gets to play that because they lost the source code. They can't just port it. They have to rebuild it. And I don't know if Sega considers that worth it because it's an RPG, a Saturn RPG. How well is that going to sell, other than the fact that, it has, at least it had a reputation. Nobody really talks about its reputation anymore. Same with sort of Suikoden 2. Nobody talks about that reputation as much as they used to. It's sort of people have moved on because it just was still kind of rare. But then we got Square Enix with Live Alive, a game that never got brought to the States, but is getting this HD 2D version, voice acting, all this stuff for a game that Westerners never played, but because we've never played it and never seen it like this, and it has that excitement to it, I've seen so many people excited for Live Alive. That's where you get into the remake and how it seems worth it, and it's while staying true to what it was. I don't think people would be as excited if it was getting a Trials of Mana type remake. But the HD 2D is a nice little in-between where it feels classic while still having a bunch of upgrades.
Even Dragon Quest III, I think that is a game that is one of the biggest and most influential RPGs of all time. And there's a good modern version. I think the mobile version, while it doesn't look the nicest, I think it plays very well. I loved my playthrough of that. But I'm still so excited for the remake, because it feels like that is the chance to present it in its definitive form. More than any kind of remaster could. Just doing it from the ground up, making it look sublime, and then also giving a bunch of quality of life improvements. I'm really excited for that remake. And obviously it looks different. If you look at any other version of Dragon Quest III, it does not look like the HD 2D version. But we can probably ramble about this stuff forever. I think we kind of made our stances relatively clear. I am totally good with remakes. I think if you remake something that feels justified, if it feels like it is a game that could benefit from being done from the ground up, a game that maybe isn't accessible, or a game that just comes from a different point in time and you can make look so much better and play so much better, I'd absolutely be okay for that. But when it's something that still feels so modern, if it still looks and feels like something I can pick off the shelf today, then I'm going to question it. Why should I be buying that? Especially when it's $70. That's more than that's almost double what the original costed over here in the UK. So it's definitely a massive investment in both resources of the developer, which could be doing something else, and resources of our own, of our money. So is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Not that I can think of. I feel like all I will say is I get it for, I guess, that accessibility. You didn't have the previous system, so now you can get this system. But PS5 is a terrible reason for, is not a great example of that. That's why I think Last of Us is especially egregious in that sense. But I think it really comes down to accessibility and how much has changed. And if they can accomplish that, we won't care. We won't care. But when it is so similar, as you said, no, it's not worth it.
I do think The Last of Us will sell well for what it's worth.
Yeah.
They've got a TV show coming up. All my complaints, they've got their earplugs in. They don't care. It's going to sell well.
Exactly.
But, yeah, with that said, thank you, though, for watching. And thank you to our live audience who've been watching this entire thing. We've been recording live with them here and waving at them. Hello, live audience.
Hello.
Hello.
We love you.
If you want to become one of them, though, you can support us over on Patreon, where for just $5 a month you can become a live audience member, and you also get a bunch of our videos early before they go live on YouTube. You can also become a live viewer of What's That Track while we record those live, and submit songs for us to choose and play in the episode itself. So thank you all for watching, consider becoming a patron, and we'll see you next time. Bye everyone.
Bye. All right.